The year was 2347, and humanity believed they were ready for anything. They had spread across 17 star systems in 200 years. They had built cities on distant moons and mining stations in asteroid belts. They had created the Earth Defense Fleet, the most powerful military force their species had ever known. 412 warships carried the flag of United Earth, and every man and woman who served aboard them believed they were invincible. They were wrong. Admiral George Palmer stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, sovereign, and watched his armada assemble near the Kepler threshold. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. But he had never seen anything like what was coming. The Vorath Dominion had appeared from the darkness beyond the Cygnus Arm 3 months ago. They had destroyed 2 human colony worlds without warning or mercy. Now, they were pushing deeper into human space. And Admiral Palmer had been ordered to stop them. He intended to do exactly that. Commander Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the destroyer, relentless, and felt a strange unease in his stomach. He was 38 years old, with a wife and daughter waiting for him. Back on Earth, he had served in the fleet for 15 years and had fought pirates and rebels and rogue colonies. But something about this mission felt different. The intelligence reports on the Vorath were incomplete. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. Nobody knew how many ships they had or what kind of weapons they carried. They were fighting an enemy they did not understand, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. His executive officer, Lieutenant Katie Morgan, walked over with a tablet in her hands. She was 29 years old, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had graduated top of her class at the academy and had turned down a comfortable desk job to serve on a combat vessel. She wanted to see the stars, she had told him once. She wanted to make a difference. "Final diagnostics complete, sir," she said. "All weapons systems are operational. Shields at full power. We are ready." Price nodded but said nothing. He looked out the viewport at the hundreds of ships surrounding them. Destroyers and frigates and cruisers stretched in every direction. Medical corvettes hung back near the rear. Troop carriers full of Marines waited for the order to advance. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and it should have made him feel confident. Instead, he felt like a man walking into a dark room where something was waiting. The Vorath arrived 2 hours later. They came out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Their ships were black and angular, covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and move. There were 300 of them, smaller than the human fleet, but arranged with a precision that suggested absolute confidence. They did not attempt communication. They did not slow down. They simply opened fire. The first wave of attacks hit the forward cruisers. Admiral Palmer had positioned them as a shield for the more valuable ships behind. They were supposed to absorb the initial assault and give the destroyers time to flank. That was the plan. The plan lasted approximately 4 seconds. The Vorath weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They fired pulses of concentrated gravity that twisted metal like paper. Shields that were designed to stop missiles and lasers simply collapsed under the assault. The cruiser Valiant was the first to die. Its hull crumpled inward as if crushed by an invisible fist, and then it exploded in a ball of white fire. 3,000 men and women died in an instant. "Commander?" Price watched in horror as ship after ship vanished from his tactical display. The fleet was firing back, but their weapons seemed to do nothing. Missiles detonated against Vorath hulls without leaving a scratch. Laser beams scattered harmlessly across their black armor. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. Admiral Palmer's voice came over the fleet communication channel. He was trying to sound calm, but Price could hear the fear underneath. "All ships, concentrate fire on the lead vessel. Target their engines. We need to slow them down." 200 ships turned their weapons on a single Vorath cruiser. They fired everything they had. The Vorath cruiser did not even change course. It simply kept coming, and its weapons kept firing, and more human ships kept dying. Lieutenant Morgan grabbed the edge of her console as the Relentless shook from a near miss. "Sir, we have lost contact with the Valiant, the Horizon, the Starbreaker, and the Iron Will. That is 40 ships in the first 3 minutes." Price felt his mouth go dry. 40 ships, 12,000 people. Gone in less time than it took to make coffee. The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for 8 more minutes. The Vorath moved through the human fleet like wolves through sheep. They seemed to know where every ship would be before it got there. Their targeting systems predicted human maneuvers with impossible accuracy. Every time a human captain tried to retreat or reposition, Vorath were already waiting. Admiral Palmer died in the 6th minute. The Sovereign took a direct hit to its reactor core and broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions. Price watched the flagship die and felt something break inside him. Palmer had been his mentor. Palmer had taught him everything he knew about command. Now Palmer was atoms floating in the void, and Price was somehow still alive, the communication channel filled with screaming and static. Captains were calling for help that would never come. Crews were abandoning ships that were already doomed. The orderly fleet had become a panicked mob, and the Vorath were slaughtering them without pause. When the firing finally stopped, Commander Price looked at his tactical display and could not believe what he saw. Of the 412 ships that had arrived, only 9 remained. 4 destroyers, including the Relentless, 3 frigates, and 2 medical corvettes. Everyone else was dead. 60,000 men and women had been erased from existence in 11 minutes. Lieutenant Morgan was crying silently at her station. Price wanted to comfort her, but he did not have the words. He did not have anything except a damaged ship and 8 other vessels that were barely holding together. The Vorath did not pursue them. They simply held position and watched as the survivors limped away. Perhaps they considered 9 ships too insignificant to bother with. Perhaps they wanted witnesses to carry the news back to Earth. Whatever the reason, they let the remnants of humanity's greatest fleet escape into the darkness. Price sat down in his command chair and gave the only order that made sense. All ships, set course for Earth. Maximum speed. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested staying to fight. There was nothing left to fight with, and nothing left to fight for, except survival. The 9 ships turned away from the graveyard of their fleet and began the long journey home. Behind them, the Vorath began moving toward the heart of human space. They had crushed the greatest military force humanity had ever built in less time than a lunch break. And they were not finished. The war had just begun. The journey home took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence and grief and endless darkness stretching in every direction. The 9 surviving ships traveled in a loose formation through hostile space, their crews working around the clock to keep damaged systems running. Sleep came rarely, and nightmares came often. Every survivor carried the weight of 60,000 dead on their shoulders. And that weight grew heavier with each passing day. Commander, Daniel Price found himself the senior surviving officer by a terrible accident of fate. Every admiral and commodore and senior captain had died in the massacre. Now a destroyer commander who had never led more than a single ship was responsible for the last. Remnants of humanity's greatest fleet. He established a rotating leadership council with the captains of the other vessels. Knowing that no single person could carry this burden alone, they met every evening via video link to discuss supplies and repairs and the route home. Nobody talked about what had happened. The wound was too fresh and too deep. Dr. Lisa Bennett served as chief medical officer aboard the corvette. Mercy, she was 41 years old, with gentle hands and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her husband Samuel had served as a navigation officer aboard the Sovereign. He had kissed her goodbye the morning of the battle and promised to take her dancing when they got home. Now Samuel was dead, and Lisa was treating the wounded and dying survivors of humanity's worst defeat. She did not allow herself to grieve. She did not allow herself to stop moving. There would be time for tears later, she told herself, or there would be no time at all. She worked 18-hour shifts treating burns and broken bones and radiation sickness. The Mercy was designed to handle 50 patients. They had 173. Survivors from destroyed ships had been picked up in the chaos of the retreat. They lay on cots in hallways and storage rooms and anywhere else that had space. Many of them stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, unable to speak or eat or respond to anything. The doctors called it battle shock. Lisa called it something else. She called it the look of people who had watched their friends die and could not understand. Why they were still alive? Lieutenant Katie Morgan became Commander Price's closest advisor during the long journey. She spent every spare moment studying the battle recordings, watching the slaughter. Verned over again until her eyes burned and her head ached. She was looking for something. A pattern. A weakness. Anything that might give humanity a chance in the war to come. On the 14th day she found it. She called an emergency meeting of the Leadership Council. The faces of 7 other captains appeared on the screen in Price's ready room. They all looked exhausted. They all looked broken. But they were still listening, and that was enough. "I found something," Morgan said. She pulled up a tactical recording on the shared display. "Watch the Vorath flagship right before it fires on the Sovereign. Watch carefully." They watched. Angular ship moved through the human fleet like a predator through prey. It locked onto the Sovereign. And then for just a moment it paused. "There," Morgan said. "A 2-second delay." "I checked every other instance where they targeted a command vessel. The same delay every single time. Right before they fire on a ship with a flag officer, they hesitate." Captain Henry Brooks of the frigate Nightfall leaned forward. He was 53 years old, with a scar across his face from an old battle. "What does that mean? Why would they hesitate?" "I do not know exactly," Morgan admitted. "But I have a theory. They are collecting data, analyzing, making sure they are targeting the right ship. That suggests they are not just following automatic programs. They are thinking. They are making decisions." "So what?" asked Captain Maria Santos of the destroyer Thunderchild. She was the youngest captain in the fleet at 32, and the massacre had aged her by a decade. "They think. They decide. They still killed 60,000 of us in 11 minutes. "Yes," Morgan said. "But anything that thinks can make mistakes. Anything that decides can be confused. Anything that hesitates can be surprised. They are not machines. They are not gods. They are an enemy, and enemies can be beaten." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Commander Price spoke. "It is not much, but it is something. Keep looking, Lieutenant. Find us more." Morgan nodded. She would not stop. Looking until she found enough somethings to build a victory. Sergeant Ryan Cole was the senior surviving Marine from the entire fleet. He was 35 years old with a thick neck and hands that had killed in close combat more times than he could count. He had been stationed on the frigate Nightfall instead of a troop carrier, and that random assignment was the only reason he was still breathing. Every Marine he had trained with, every friend he had made in 12 years of service, was dead. The guilt of surviving aided him every night. But Cole was not a man who sat still with his pain. He was a man who turned pain into action. During the journey home, he began talking to the other Marines scattered across the surviving ships. There were only 47 of them left, but they were angry, and they were ready to fight. Cole started planning. The Vorath have never faced ground combat, he told them during a late-night video conference. Every species they have conquered folded after losing their fleet. They expect the same from us. They expect us to surrender once they control the space above our worlds. Will we not? Asked Corporal Diana Vance, a young woman with a shaved head and fierce eyes. "No," Cole said. "We will not. We are going to teach them what happens when humans fight on the ground. Every city becomes a fortress. Every building becomes a trap. Every street becomes a killing field. Make the cost of occupation so high that they choke on it." The Marines listened, and despite everything they had lost, they began to hope. When the 9 ships finally reached Earth, they were met not with celebration, but with terror. News of the massacre had already arrived through faster-than-light communication. The people of Earth knew that their fleet was destroyed. They knew that the Vorath were coming. And they knew that nothing stood between them and extinction except 9 damaged ships and the broken survivors aboard them. The cities were in chaos. Some people were fleeing to the countryside, believing that open spaces would be safer. Were stockpiling food and weapons, preparing to fight to the last breath. Politicians argued on television about surrender versus resistance. Religious leaders spoke of judgment and apocalypse. Children asked their parents why the sky felt so dangerous. Parents had no answers to give. Commander Price was ordered to appear before the United Earth Council in Geneva. He walked into the great chamber, where the leaders of 17 star systems sat waiting for answers. They looked at him with desperate eyes. They looked at him like he was the last hope of a dying species. "Tell us what happened," demanded Councilwoman Patricia Dunn, the head of the military committee. "Tell us everything," so Price told them. He told them about the gravity weapons that crushed ships like tin cans. He told them about the targeting systems that predicted every human move. He told them about Admiral Palmer dying in a ball of fire, and 60,000 people becoming dust in 11 minutes. He did not soften the truth. He did not offer false comfort. He gave them the reality, cold and hard and terrible. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Several council members were crying. Others simply stared at nothing with the same empty eyes Price had seen on the wounded aboard the Mercy. "Then it is hopeless," someone whispered. "No," Price said. His voice was quiet but firm. "It is not hopeless. We lost because we did not understand our enemy. We fought them with old tactics and old thinking. We treated them like every other opponent we had ever faced. That was our mistake." "What do you suggest?" Councilwoman Dunn asked. Price looked at the assembled leaders of humanity. These frightened men and women held the fate of billions in their trembling hands. They needed more than a military report. They needed someone to tell them that survival was possible. "We learn," Price said. "We adapt. We change everything about how we fight, and we never, ever give up. The Vorith think they have already won. We are going to prove them wrong." The council members looked at each other. They looked at the commander who had survived the unsurvivable. And slowly, one by one, they began to nod. The war was not over. It was just beginning. The months that followed the massacre were the most intense in human history. Every shipyard in 17 star systems began working triple shifts. Factories that had made consumer goods switched to weapons production overnight. Universities canceled regular classes and devoted all resources to military research. The entire human species had one goal and one purpose: survival. Commander Price was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Fleet Reconstruction Division. It was a title without a fleet, but that would change. He worked 20-hour days reviewing ship designs and personnel reports and intelligence summaries. He slept on a cot in his office and ate meals at his desk. His wife Helen called every night, but their conversations were short. There was too much work to do and too little time to do it. Lieutenant Morgan was promoted to captain and placed in charge of the Tactical Analysis Department. She assembled a team of the brightest minds in the fleet and set them to work studying every fragment of data from the battle. They analyzed Vorith movement patterns and weapon signatures and communication frequencies. They built computer models to predict enemy behavior. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to understand how the enemy thought. "They operate on probability," Morgan explained during a briefing with the High Command. "Their targeting systems calculate the most likely position of each enemy ship and fire before the ship even gets there. That is why our maneuvers were useless. They were not reacting to what we did. They were predicting what we would do." "Do we counter that?" asked Admiral Chen, the new commander of Home Fleet. "We become unpredictable," Morgan said. "Stop fighting like a fleet and start fighting like individuals. Random movements, decentralized command, no patterns for them to analyze." Dr. Lisa Bennett was appointed Director of Combat Medicine for the entire Earth Defense Force. She took the lessons learned aboard the Mercy and built new protocols for treating the unique injuries caused by Vorath weapons. Gravity pulse damage required different treatment than anything human doctors had faced before. Internal organs could be crushed without breaking the skin. Bones could be shattered in patterns that made no biological sense. Bennett trained thousands of doctors and nurses in the new techniques and designed mobile hospital ships that could operate in active combat zones. She still had not grieved for Samuel. She told herself she would do it after the war. There was an after. Sergeant Cole was promoted to major and given command of the new planetary Defense Corps. He took his 47 surviving Marines and turned them into instructors. Within 3 months, they had trained 10,000 ground fighters in the tactics of urban warfare and guerrilla resistance. Cole developed new weapons that could be manufactured quickly and used by civilians with minimal training. He created networks of bunkers and tunnels beneath every major city on Earth. He turned the homeworld into a fortress. The Vorath have conquered hundreds of species, Cole told his trainees. Not one of them ever fought back after losing their fleet. They surrendered, or they ran, or they hid. We are going to do something different. We're going to make them bleed for every inch of ground they try to take. When they finally realize the cost is too high, they will leave. Or they will die trying to stay. But it was a young engineer named Kevin Walsh who made the breakthrough that changed everything. Walsh was 26 years old, with messy hair and thick glasses, and a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. He had been assigned to analyze the debris recovered from destroyed Vorath ships. For weeks he found nothing useful. The alien technology was too advanced, too different from anything humans had built. Then one night, while everyone else was sleeping, he discovered the secret of their shields. Walsh ran to Admiral Price's office at 3 a.m. He burst through the door without knocking, his eyes wild with excitement and exhaustion. "I know how to stop them," he said. Price sat up on his cot and rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about, Lieutenant?" "They're gravity weapons," Walsh said. "They work by matching the frequency of our shields. They find the frequency and then generate a pulse that cancels it out. That is why our shields collapse so easily. The Vorath are not overpowering them. They are neutralizing them. Can we fix that?" "Yes," Walsh said. "We modify our shield generators to rotate frequencies randomly. Thousands of changes per second. The Vorath cannot match a frequency that keeps changing. Their weapons will still do damage, but they will not be able to collapse our shields instantly. It will buy us time. It will give us a fighting chance." Price was fully awake now. "How long to implement this?" "If we prioritize it above everything else, 6 weeks for the new ships. Retrofitting the existing vessels will take longer." "Do it," Price said. "Whatever resources you need, you have them." Walsh nodded and ran back to his laboratory. He would not sleep for the next 3 days. The new ships began rolling out of the shipyards for months after the massacre. They were smaller and faster than the old designs. They carried Walsh's rotating frequency shields and weapons, systems designed to exploit what Morgan had learned about Vorath's behavior. Each ship operated with greater independence, able to make tactical decisions without waiting for orders from a flagship. The old fleet had been a single organism. The new fleet was a swarm. Admiral Price named his new flagship the Defiance. It was a destroyer-class vessel, smaller than the dreadnoughts of the old fleet but more advanced in every way. He chose it deliberately. The age of massive command ships was over. The age of speed and adaptability had begun. Captain Morgan transferred to the Defiance as executive officer. She brought her entire tactical analysis team with her. Dr. Bennett established her headquarters on the medical cruiser Hope, which could deploy 6 mobile surgery units to any battlefield. Major Cole dispersed his ground forces across every human world, ready to resist invasion wherever it came. 6 months after the massacre, Earth was no longer afraid. Earth was angry. The people had watched their fleet destroyed and their sons and daughters murdered. They had spent weeks believing that extinction was inevitable, and then they had decided to fight anyway. Not because victory was certain, not because they knew they could win, but because surrender was not in their nature, because humanity had faced extinction before and had always found a way to survive. News came from the outer colonies that the Vorath were advancing. They had conquered 3 more worlds, but the conquests were not going as smoothly as before. Resistance movements were forming. Guerrilla attacks were disrupting Vorath's supply lines. The techniques that Major Cole had developed were spreading across human space. The enemy was winning battles but losing soldiers. They were gaining territory but paying a price. Admiral Price assembled the new fleet near Jupiter. 200 ships, each one carrying the hopes of humanity. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were not the same fleet that had died at the Kepler threshold. They were something new, something angry, something that refused to accept defeat. "The Vorath are coming for Earth," Price announced to his captains. "They expect to find a broken species ready for subjugation. They expect us to surrender like every other civilization they have crushed. We are going to prove them wrong. We are going to show them what happens when you push humanity to the edge." Captain Morgan stood beside him on the bridge of the Defiance. Tactical analysis suggests they will arrive in 3 days. Standard invasion formation based on their previous attacks. Good, Price said. That means they have not adapted yet. They still think they are fighting the same enemy they destroyed 6 months ago. He looked out at the fleet surrounding him. 200 ships instead of 400? Crews that had trained for weeks instead of years. Technology that was untested in actual combat. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was what they had, and humanity would make it count. All ships, Price said into the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Price. The enemy is coming. They killed our friends. They killed our families. They think we are already beaten. They are wrong. When they arrive, we will teach them what humanity is made of. We will fight not as a single fleet, but as 200 individual weapons. We will be unpredictable. We will be relentless. And we will not stop until victory or death. The channel crackled with responses. Crews cheering. Captains affirming their readiness. The sounds of a species that had chosen to fight rather than fade away. 3 days until the Vorath arrived. 3 days until humanity proved what it could become. The Vorath arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. 312 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, exactly as Captain Morgan had predicted. Their black angular hulls gleamed in the distant sunlight as they assembled near the orbit of Mars. They did not pause. They did not attempt communication. They simply began their advance toward Earth. Confident that nothing in the universe could stop them, they had crushed 400 human ships in 11 minutes. What threat could 200 pose? Admiral Price watched the enemy approach on the tactical display aboard the Defiance. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment. 6 months of grief and anger and desperate work. Now they would discover if it was enough. All ships execute pattern Omega, he ordered. Scatter formation. Independent targeting. Do not cluster. Do not form lines. Move like water. Human fleet dissolved into chaos. 200 ships broke in 200 different directions, each one following its own unpredictable path. There were no neat formations. There were no coordinated volleys. There was only movement, constant and random and impossible to predict. The Vorath opened fire. Their gravity weapons lashed out across space, seeking human ships with the same terrible accuracy that had destroyed the First Fleet. But something was different. The pulses struck human shields, and the shields held. Not perfectly. Not completely. But they held long enough for the ships to move. Long enough for them to escape the killing zone. Long enough to matter? Kevin Walsh's rotating frequency shields were working. Direct hit on the Thunderchild, reported the tactical officer. Shields at 60% but holding. They are still in the fight. Price allowed himself a small smile. 60%. In the first battle, shields had collapsed instantly. Now they were taking hits and surviving. It was not victory, but it was something far better than defeat. Captain Morgan coordinated the counterattack from her station. Her voice was calm and precise as she directed the wolf packs toward vulnerable targets. Alpha Group, focus on the Vorath cruiser at coordinates 773. Beta Group, draw fire from the lead destroyer. Gamma Group, flank and strike from behind. The human ships darted and weaved through the Vorath formation like angry hornets. They fired quick bursts and retreated before the enemy could lock on. They attacked from unexpected angles and vanished into the chaos before retaliation could find them. They were not trying to win a pitched battle. They were trying to bleed the enemy one wound at a time. The first Vorath ship exploded 40 minutes into the engagement. It was a destroyer-class vessel that had been chasing the frigate Nightfall. Captain Henry Brooks had led it into a trap, pulling back just far enough to lure the enemy forward. 3 human ships appeared from behind an asteroid and struck the Vorath destroyer from multiple angles simultaneously. The alien shields flickered. The weapons found their mark, and the black angular hull burst apart in a shower of debris and fire. The communication channel erupted with cheers. Human crews who had watched their friends die were finally seeing blood. The enemy was not invincible. The enemy could be hurt. The enemy could be killed, but the cost was high. The destroyer Valiant II took a direct hit and broke apart. The frigate Shadow was crippled and left drifting. Human ships were dying too, and the Voroth still outnumbered them significantly. This was not a battle humanity could win through attrition. They needed to change the equation, Admiral Morgan said. I am detecting an anomaly in the Vorath formation. Their command ship is holding back. Minimal movement. Limited weapons fire? What are they doing? Analyzing, Morgan said. They are trying to understand our new tactics. They have never faced anything like this before. They need time to adapt. Then we do not give them time, Price said. All ships, new orders. Full assault on the Vorath command vessel. Everything we have. Now, it was a gamble. Concentrating the fleet meant giving up the advantage of dispersion. But the Vorath command ship was the key. Destroy it, and the enemy would be left confused and leaderless. The risk was worth the reward. 147 surviving human. Ships turned toward the Vorath flagship and charged. They came from every direction, a swarm of angry metal converging on a single target. The Voroth escort ships tried to intercept, but there were too many humans moving too fast in too many different patterns. The defenses could not track them all. The command ship's shields lit up as weapons. Fire from dozens of human vessels struck simultaneously. The shields held for 30 seconds, then 45, then 60. The Vorath flagship was taking more sustained fire than any human ship had ever delivered before, and still its shields refused to collapse. Maintain fire, Price ordered. Do not stop. Do not let up. Break them. Dr. Lisa Bennett watched the battle from the medical cruiser Hope, positioned safely behind the combat zone. Her mobile surgery units were already deploying to recover wounded from damaged ships. Casualties were streaming in. Burns and radiation sickness, and broken bodies that had been thrown against bulkheads by the force of impacts. She worked without pause, her hands moving automatically while her mind tracked the tactical display. Come on, she whispered. Come on. The Vorath command ship's shields collapsed at the 90-second mark. Human weapons tore into the unprotected hull. Explosions rippled across the black angular surface. Secondary systems detonated in chains of fire that spread from bow to stern. For a moment, the massive ship seemed to hang motionless in space, as if surprised by what was happening. Then it broke apart, scattering debris in every direction. The Vorath fleet faltered. For the first time in recorded history, Vorath ships stopped advancing. They stopped firing. They simply held position, as if waiting for orders that would never come. The sudden silence was almost more shocking than the battle had been. They are confused, Morgan said, wonder in her voice. They lost their command ship, and they do not know what to do. All ships press the attack, Price ordered. Hit them now while they are stunned. Make them pay for every life they have taken. The human fleet surged forward. The battle raged for another 4 hours. It was brutal and bloody, and nothing like the elegant tactical exercises taught at the academy. It was a street fight in space, desperate and vicious and utterly without mercy. Human ships died. Vorath ships died. The void filled with wreckage and bodies, and the glowing remnants of destroyed reactors. When the Vorath finally retreated, they left 73 of their ships behind as debris. Humanity had lost 47 vessels. Over 12,000 men and women had died in the engagement. But for the first time, the Vorath had been hurt worse than their enemy. For the first time, they had retreated from a battlefield. For the first time, they had failed to destroy everything in their path. Major Cole received the news on Earth, where he was coordinating the planetary defenses. He was treating the wounded arm of a young Marine who had been injured in a training accident. When the report came through, he stopped what he was doing and stared at the screen for a long moment. We did it, the young Marine said. We actually did it. We hurt them, Cole corrected. We did not beat them, not yet. They will come back stronger and angrier, and we need to be ready. But despite his cautious words, Cole was smiling. Humanity had proven something today. They had proven that the Vorath could bleed. They had proven that the massacre at the Kepler threshold was not the end of the story. They had proven that when you push humans to the edge of extinction, they do not surrender. They push back. Admiral Price stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the surviving fleet regrouped. 153 ships remained. Many were damaged. All were exhausted. But they were alive, and they had done the impossible. "Sir," Morgan said quietly, "the Vorath are holding position at the edge of the system. They are not leaving, but they are not advancing either. They are waiting," Price said. "They need to understand what just happened. They need to figure out how a species they had already written off as defeated managed to destroy their command ship and drive them back. What do we do now?" Price looked out at the stars. The same stars that had once seemed so threatening now looked like a promise that humanity would not go quietly into the darkness. "We rebuild," he said. "We train. We build more ships and develop better weapons. And the next time they come, we hit them even harder." On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. People who had been preparing for extinction were dancing in the streets. Children who had been told they might never grow up were laughing and playing. The victory was not complete. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the massacre, humanity believed they could survive. And sometimes, belief is the most powerful weapon of all. The war lasted 3 more years. 3 years of battles and losses and small victories that slowly added up to something larger. 3 years of humanity learning and adapting and becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. The Vorath threw everything they had at the stubborn species that refused to die, and humanity threw it right back. Admiral Price led the fleet through 17 major engagements. He lost ships in every battle. He wrote letters to widows and parents and children who would never see their loved ones again. The weight of command pressed down on him like a physical force, and some nights he wondered if he could carry it for one more day. But every morning he got up and returned to the bridge of the Defiance. Every morning he made the choice to keep fighting. Captain Morgan became the finest tactical mind in human history. She developed new strategies that the Vorath could not predict, and countermeasures for every weapon they deployed. She worked 18 hours a day and slept in her uniform and rarely smiled. But when human ships outmaneuvered the enemy and struck killing blows, there was a fierce satisfaction in her eyes that spoke louder than any celebration. Dr. Lisa Bennett saved more lives than anyone could count. Her medical protocols spread across the fleet and were eventually adopted by civilian hospitals throughout human space. She finally grieved for Samuel on the 2nd anniversary of his death, crying alone in her quarters until she had no tears left. Then she dried her eyes and went back to work. The living needed her more than the dead. Major Cole led the ground forces on 4 different worlds. When the Vorath landed troops to occupy human colonies, they found not surrender, but resistance. Every city became a death trap. Every building held fighters who refused to give up. The Vorath had never encountered anything like it. They were warriors who expected their enemies to know when they were beaten. Humans apparently did not understand that concept. Kevin Walsh continued to develop new technologies. His rotating frequency shields were just the beginning. He created weapons that could pierce Vorath's armor. He designed engines that made human ships faster and more maneuverable. He worked himself to exhaustion and then kept working. When people asked him how he managed it, he simply said that sleeping was easier when the war was over. The turning point came at the Battle of Nova Prime. The Vorath had assembled their largest fleet since the massacre. 400 ships intent on breaking the back of human resistance once and for all. Admiral Price met them with 300 vessels and a plan that required perfect execution and a tremendous amount of luck. The battle lasted 2 days. Human ships used asteroids and debris fields for cover. They attacked in waves and retreated before the enemy could concentrate fire. They drew the Vorath fleet deeper and deeper into the system, stretching their formation thin. And when the moment was right, Price sprung the trap. 100 ships that had been hiding behind the gas giant emerged at full speed. They struck the Vorath rear while the main fleet engaged from the front. The enemy found themselves surrounded for the first time in their long history of conquest. Their formations collapsed. Their coordination failed. Their ships began dying in numbers that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier, when the battle ended. Humanity had destroyed over 200 Vorath vessels. The enemy fleet limped away with less than half its original strength. And for the first time, the Vorath began to consider something they had never considered before. They began to consider peace. The war officially ended on March 15, 2351. Admiral Price stood on the deck of the Relentless, the same ship that had fled the first massacre 4 years earlier. Around him stood the other survivors of those terrible 11 minutes. Captain Morgan, Dr. Bennett, Major Cole, Kevin Walsh, and dozens of others who had lived when so. Many had died. The Vorath delegation arrived in a small transport ship. 3 tall beings, with gray skin and eyes that held no readable emotion. They walked through the human vessel as if expecting an attack at any moment. They had never been aboard an enemy ship before. They had never needed to negotiate. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that victory was inevitable. "We do not understand," said the Vorath leader through a translation device. Its voice was flat and mechanical. "We destroyed your fleet. We killed your warriors. By every calculation, you should have surrendered. Why did you keep fighting?" Admiral Price looked at the alien and thought about the 60,000 who had died in 11 minutes. He thought about the hundreds of thousands who had died in the years since. He thought about his wife Helen, who had waited for him every night. He thought about all the families who were still waiting for people who would never come home. "You killed 60,000 of us and thought we would give up," Price said. "You did not understand that every death made the rest of us more determined. You saw our losses as proof of weakness. We saw them as reasons to fight harder. That is what you never understood about humanity. We do not surrender because we are winning. We fight because we refuse to lose." The Vorath were silent for a long moment. Then the leader spoke again. "We have conquered 417 species across 1,000 years. Not one of them ever defeated us. Not one of them ever adapted so quickly. Not one of them ever became stronger through defeat. What are you?" "We are human," Price said simply. "And you would do well to remember that." The treaty was signed that afternoon. The Vorath agreed to withdraw from all human space and to cease all hostile actions permanently. In exchange, humanity agreed not to pursue them into their own territory. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but it ended the war. It brought peace. After the Vorath departed, Price walked through the corridors of the Relentless. He stopped at the observation deck and looked out at the stars. The same stars he had seen when fleeing the massacre. The same stars that had seemed so cold and indifferent to human suffering. Captain Morgan found him there an hour later. She stood beside him in comfortable silence for a long moment before speaking. "What happens now, sir?" "Now we rebuild," Price said. "We bury our dead. We heal our wounded. We raise our children in a galaxy where humanity has earned its place." "And the Vorath, do you think they will stay peaceful?" "I think they learned something today," Price said. "They learned that there are species in this universe that cannot be conquered. They learned that sometimes the cost of victory is higher than they are willing to pay. And they learned to be afraid of us." Morgan nodded slowly. "Good. They should be." The news of peace spread across human space within hours. On Earth, people gathered in the streets to celebrate. On colony worlds that had lived under the threat of invasion, children played in the sunlight for the first time without fear. In hospitals and recovery centers, wounded veterans wept with relief. The long nightmare was finally over. Dr. Bennett treated her last war casualty the day the treaty was signed. A young pilot who had been injured in the final battle. As she finished bandaging his wounds, she realized she was smiling. Actually smiling. She could not remember the last time that had happened. Major Cole dismissed his ground forces and told them to go home to their families. Many of them had been fighting since the beginning. Many of them had lost everyone they loved. But they had won. They had defended their homeworlds against an enemy that had never been defeated before. And they would carry that knowledge with them for the rest of their lives. Kevin Walsh finally slept. For 3 days straight, he slept in a real bed with clean sheets and no alarm set to wake him for emergencies. When he finally woke up, he made breakfast and watched the sunrise and thought about all the things he wanted to build now that he was not building weapons, Admiral. Price retired 1 year after the war ended. He went home to Helen and tried to remember what normal life felt like. Some nights he still dreamed of the massacre. Some nights he still heard the screaming on the communication channels. But more and more, he dreamed of the victory at Nova Prime. He dreamed of the Voreth retreating. He dreamed of peace. The 9 survivors of the first battle gathered every year on the anniversary. They told stories about the friends they had lost. They raised glasses to absent comrades. They remembered the fear and the grief and the determination that had carried them through the darkest days humanity had ever known, and they reminded themselves of the lesson they had learned in Fire and Blood. Humanity was not a species that surrendered. Humanity was not a species that accepted defeat. When pushed to the edge of extinction, humans did not give up. They evolved. They adapted. They became something stronger and fiercer than they had ever been before. The galaxy had learned to respect that. The galaxy had learned to fear that. And the galaxy would never forget. Humanity had arrived.